Hi, my name is Gian and I am here for the bio written work. We'll be talking about the urinary system. So, the first question is, wait. The first question is, trace the flow of plasma or blood through the arteries, nephron, and veins. So, here, I made a diagram. So this is our kidney, and the arteries are with red, and the veins are blue. So the arteries here starts from the renal artery. The blood flows from the heart, or from the main artery to the renal artery. It goes down here into the segmental arteries. Now the segmental arteries are those that go into segments into the medulla. So from the segmental artery here, it passes into the interlobar artery, which is on the around the medulla, and up here is the arcuate artery, which holds the interlobular artery, which is even smaller. And those very small interlobar arteries are the ones that connect that is like near the nephron. So the interlobular arteries, the blood passes to the interlobular arteries and into the afferent arteriole. The afferent arteriole here is attached to the glomerulus. This is the glomerulus here, and from the glomerulus, and this is where the filtering occurs. From the glomerulus, there's the efferent arteriole here, and then goes into the peritubular capillaries here. This of everything here, the red lines here, and goes back. After it's done its job here, it goes back, then goes back to the heart through the interlobular vein, then the arcuate vein, then here the interlobar vein, and here the renal vein, going back. So it just goes in through the arteries, passes through the nephron, and goes back to through the vein. Next is, what are the 3 steps or processes of urine formation, where do they occur, and what materials are reabsorbed or secreted into the urine? So I have another diagram. The blood starts here, the afferent arteriole here, goes into the glomerular capillaries, then the filtration occurs. The blood it's pushed onto a mesh. It's pushed onto a mesh that pushes the tiny particles through the mesh and into here, the glomerular capsule. But the blood isn't, it's too big for to go through the mesh, so it goes back here. And then here, the tiny particles, water comes in. Water is also pushed, but sometimes we need it, so some of it, or could be all of it, water or glucose, it goes back here. It's reabsorption into the blood. And the third process is secretion. The components of the blood goes into the filtrate here. These are drugs, these are metabolites and potassium, etc. The things that the body does not need. So then it's secreted here, and excretion occurs. That's the last, but there's only mainly 3 steps of urine production. Yes. So first, filtration, tiny particles into here, reabsorption of water, glucose, and the waste. The waste will become urine. The waste, the ones that it's not reabsorbed, it will become urine, and the secretion of the different drugs, metabolites, potassium, and they join the filtrate to be excreted. And the next one, what are the three mechanisms that our body uses in maintaining blood pH? What are the structures involved and how do they work? So there are three. There's buffers, and there's respiratory compensation, and the renal compensation. The buffer system. So the buffer system, what happens here? A buffer is basically if the blood pH is like goes too acidic, what happens? It brings it back to the normal 7.35 or to 7.45. And if ever it's too basic, it brings it back to that level again. So the main one here, the main buffer here, this acts fast. This buffer system is the first one to act if ever the balance is shifted. So here, carbonic acid and bicarbonate buffer system. So actually I have it here. Here, if ever the body has too much hydrogen ions, which makes the body more acidic, it binds onto the bicarbonate and becomes this H2CO3. And if ever the body needs more hydrogen ions because it's too basic, it goes back here. It shifts again. Basically, that's what happens in a buffer system. There are different buffer systems. The carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer system, protein buffer system, hemoglobin buffer system, and there's also the phosphate buffer system. Now, another one is respiratory compensation. So what happens here is that the CO2 here is, well, it's turned into the hydrogen ion, and hydrogen ion, if there's too much, it turns into the CO2 and it's expelled from the body. So if ever there's too much hydrogen in the body, what happens is the rate and depth of breathing increases, because when we breathe, we expel CO2. CO2 is expelled, and if ever there is a low amount of hydrogen ions, the rate and depth of breathing is decreased, because we need to keep that CO2 here inside to turn it into the hydrogen ion. So the peripheral, what the peripheral chemoreceptor does is that if there's too much hydrogen ion, it tells the body that, oh, there's too much, so we have to increase the rate of breathing. And if we have the low amount of CO2, it's detected by the central chemoreceptors, and the rate and depth of breathing is decreased, because it's decreased. That's the basic what happens. Rate and depth of breathing increases and decreases. So next is the renal compensation. So what happens here is there is an H plus excretion and HCO3 excretion. The body naturally excretes the HCO3. So it's in here, the lumen. What happens here is the H plus from the proximal convoluted tube will bind onto the HCO3 here, or the bicarbonate, and form H2CO3, and this will dissociate into H2O and CO2, because H2O and CO2 can pass through easier here in the proximal convoluted tube, convoluted tube. So once it passes through, the H2CO3 is again dissociated into hydrogen ion and the bicarbonate ion here. So that happens, HCO3 is sent into the blood, and the hydrogen ion is sent back here to the urine to be secreted. So the ammonia secretion here is used to eliminate H plus in the hydrogen ion through the different acids of the body. Yeah, that's what basically what happens here. So this is the blood, this is the urine, and this is the proximal convoluted tube. So if ever it's secreted, but the blood becomes more basic. That's the diagram here. This one secretes, and this one goes here. So the last one is, what are the implications of acidosis and alkalosis? So acidosis, what happens here is when the body's pH is less than 7.35. Two could happen. Metabolic acidosis is when there are too much acid secreted by the body, and this causes nausea, vomiting, fatigue. Respiratory acidosis is when too much CO2 is within the body. There is a saturated amount of CO2, and this causes headache and drowsiness. Both these factors are result into a lower pH of the body. And alkalosis here is different because the pH is over 7.45, which is because 7.35 and 7 to 7.45 is the body's nominal state, basically. And metabolic alkalosis here, what happens here, usually this happens when too much acid is expelled from the body. And the respiratory alkalosis is if ever there is a less amount of CO2 in the body, meaning we are expelling too much CO2 from the body. This could happen when we hyperventilate. So this causes irritability, muscle twitching and cramps, tingling in fingers, toes, and around lips. So that's basically it. Thank you.